I'm Evelyn Wren. For 12 years, I was the invisible architect behind everything that kept Covalon running. Licenses, audits, compliance systems. Quiet, precise, and always 10 steps ahead. They called me legacy. They thought I was replaceable. They forgot one thing: I was the license. The meeting with no exit. They called it an optimization session. I called it the beginning of an execution. It was Tuesday morning. The kind of Tuesday that pretends to be harmless. Sunlight leaking through the blinds, coffee slightly too bitter, emails rolling in like quiet waves. I was halfway through reviewing a vendor compliance log when the calendar pinged. Subject line: strategic restructure discussion. Required. I didn't flinch. I'd been in this company long enough to know that strategic means someone's about to be sacrificed, and discussion means they've already made the decision. When I joined Covalon Biosystems 12 years ago, we were 10 people in a basement office with cardboard desks. Now, we had 3 floors, a private server room, and a rooftop garden nobody used. Progress, they called it. I called it distraction. Because the core of what we did, biotech compliance management, was still built on the same system. My system. I walked into the conference room with the calm of a surgeon. 5 people were already seated, all from executive operations. They were too well dressed for a last-minute meeting. That's when I knew. Then came him, Liam Grant, the new Chief Efficiency Officer. His title alone told me everything I needed to know. 30-something, slick hair, steel gray suit, the kind of man who says innovation 5 times before his second espresso. He smiled like he had something to sell you. And unfortunately, he did. Morning. All, Liam said, sliding into the head seat like he had always belonged there. I won't waste time. This company is moving forward, and that means we have to reevaluate legacy roles. He looked at me when he said, legacy. I didn't blink. I didn't move. He clicked the remote, and a slide appeared. Words floated on a white screen in big, blue letters. Streamline. Restructure. Realign. I wanted to laugh. It sounded like the opening to a yoga class designed by a hedge fund. Some positions, Liam continued, have become functionally redundant. The systems have evolved. Automation is improving. What we need is agility. What he meant was, what we need is fewer people like you. What he didn't know was the system had not evolved without me. For 12 years, I had built every inch of our compliance infrastructure, every renewal log, every digital signature map, every server-side audit chain, and every license, every single legal permit and authorization that allowed Covalon to operate was still tied to my credentials. Not out of ego, out of necessity, because no one else understood how it worked. They had relied on me for so long, they forgot how deep the roots went. Until now. Liam gestured toward the screen. A new slide appeared. My name. Under it 2 words in bold. Under review. That was when I knew they were going to erase me. Not with a confrontation, not with questions, just with a quiet update to a slide, a nod from HR, and a notice in my inbox after it was already done. But what they didn't realize, what Liam had overlooked in his rush to impress the board, was this: you don't delete the architect from the blueprint and expect the building to hold. That afternoon I stayed late. Not to protest, not to beg, to prepare. Because if they wanted to replace me, they'd have to do it without knowing how to read the map I'd written in a language only I understood. The silent backups. That evening, the office was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every single sound. An echo of footsteps, the soft hum of servers, the low creak of your own chair when you shift. I didn't turn the lights on. I didn't need them. I had done this before. Not the being fired part, but the part where you prepare for war without drawing a sword. I opened the secure terminal in the compliance suite. My old kingdom. My credentials still worked. Of course they did. They had been designed to expire only on one condition: voluntary revocation confirmed through biometric scan and signature match. They hadn't fired me yet. They were trying to ease me out politely, hoping I would leave without asking questions. But I don't do polite exits, I do controlled transitions. First, I accessed the license grid. 42 certifications, federal, environmental, pharmaceutical, international trade, each one assigned to my ID, each one requiring active monitoring and verification cycles. Next, I exported the registry, then encrypted it, then backed it up twice, once to an offline USB hidden in a hollowed-out manual labeled 2020 Waste Disposal Protocols, and once to a private cloud folder named Q1 Training Recipes. Then I opened a folder called Contingency, and I read something I hadn't looked at in years. Clause 14b of my original contract. It was legal poetry. In the event of involuntary termination, all certifications and licenses, procured or maintained under the authority of the employee, shall be rendered void within 72 hours unless otherwise transferred by direct authorization of said employee. That clause was my parachute, or my detonator, depending on how you looked at it. I had suggested it back when no one read contracts thoroughly. They called me paranoid. I called it professional foresight. By the time I shut down the terminal, it was nearly 10 p.m. The lights in Liam's office were still on. I passed by his glass wall and saw him laughing on a video call, probably talking about next quarter projections, probably planning my replacement. He didn't see me. But I saw him. I saw the cracks, the arrogance, the mistake of a man who thought access meant ownership, who thought streamlining meant simplifying, who believed that experience could be duplicated with enthusiasm and a PowerPoint. He didn't know he was standing on a scaffold I had quietly loosened, bolt by bolt. That night, as I walked out of the building, I didn't feel defeated. I felt ready, because they hadn't removed me yet. But when they did, they would learn something the hard way. You can replace a name on a slide, but you can't replace what that name knew, unless you ask the right questions before you delete the answer. The reassignment game, by Thursday, things began to shift, not in a dramatic way. Nothing ever starts with thunder. It begins with a silence you don't recognize, a change in someone's tone, a small email missing your name. The first red flag wasn't red at all. It was beige, polite, and copied to too many people. Subject line: transition of routine duties. I wasn't surprised. I was already expecting it. What caught my attention wasn't the message, it was who sent it. Amber, junior associate. Hired 6 months ago. Fresh out of business school. Smart, polite, and completely unprepared to take over regulatory documentation for the European market. That had been my responsibility since 2017. It required an understanding of cross-border medical licensing, language discrepancies in filing templates, and most importantly, personal relationships with compliance officers in 3 countries. Amber had none of that, and yet there she was being transitioned in. Later that day, Liam called a team huddle. He stood at the center of the open floor, hands clasped, voice calm. We're evolving. We want everyone to have a chance to grow into new roles that align with our future. Future, that word again. He said it like a weapon, a smiling blade. I watched as people nodded, the interns, the new hires. They ate up every word like it was career fuel. When he got to me, his smile softened. Evelyn, we're grateful for your historical contributions. Historical. As if I was a chapter already closed. We believe now's a great time to refresh our structure. We've already started redistributing some of your processes to the broader team. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. Instead, I gave him a smile I'd reserved for moments like this. The kind of smile you offer someone walking confidently into a pit they don't know is there. That afternoon, I checked the license dashboard. One access permission had already been reassigned. To Amber. I opened her profile. She had admin privileges for the European regulation logs. She didn't even have 2-factor authentication enabled. So I logged in from a remote terminal I had built years ago, back when our servers were still vulnerable. No one ever asked why I insisted on maintaining a shadow audit layer. I revoked her access. Quietly, no alerts triggered. I added a rule to the system. Any future attempts to assign administrative control without biometric approval would trigger silent lockout mode. If they were going to take me out of the system, they'd do it manually. and manual meant slow. The next morning, Amber asked me in the kitchen how to print a compliance letter for the German trade office. I told her politely to check the onboarding guide. She nodded and smiled, not realizing the onboarding guide was a 12-page PDF I had written to confuse anyone who didn't know how to navigate the real files. Later that day, Liam reassigned another portion of my job, this time to someone from marketing. They were assigning federal documentation protocols to people who thought ISO was just a file format. It was getting sloppy, and sloppiness meant only one thing. They were rushing, which told me one thing even more important. They were scared. They didn't want to fire me. They wanted me to quit, because if I quit, my contract protections wouldn't activate, my licenses wouldn't be revoked, and they could keep my infrastructure without paying for it. But I wasn't quitting. I had spent too long building something that worked. And if they wanted to cut me out, they'd have to do it the hard way, which meant they'd have to walk straight into a system that didn't recognize them. Trigger Protocol's Monday came dressed like any other. That was the danger of Mondays. They lull you into thinking you have time. I walked into the office at 8:42 a.m., the exact time I always arrived. It was a ritual I didn't need, but respected. Rituals were anchors. And when people around you were trying to erase everything you've built, small routines were how you reminded yourself you still owned the ground you stood on. The first sign came before I even reached my desk. The compliance door lock blinked red. Invalid user. I tried again. Access denied. I stood there for a moment, silent. Behind me, I could feel the eyes of others, pretending not to notice, pretending they weren't watching me be quietly shut out from the system I had designed. I didn't panic. Instead, I walked calmly to the IT terminal on the far end of the floor. The old one, the one no one remembered existed, hidden in the maintenance closet behind the supply cabinets. I had installed it years ago as a backup interface in case of system outages. Back then, they said it was overkill. Today, it was salvation. I logged in. Shadow access. My credentials still worked there. I pulled up the dashboard logs. 3 licenses had already been transferred, not officially, just re-signed, in the system with no corresponding approvals. The name replacing mine, Liam. Liam Grant had tried to install himself as the certifying officer. That was more than unethical. That was illegal. He wasn't certified. He wasn't approved by any board. He didn't even have the clearance to process a routine audit. But there it was. His name, typed where mine had always been. No digital signature, no biometric scan. Just typed. It was time. I opened the protocol index, and I ran trigger C. It was a kill switch, one I had built quietly years ago during a particularly chaotic merger. Not out of spite, out of necessity. Trigger C did not shut the system down. It rewound it. It rolled back every unauthorized change in the last 7 days and locked all credentials linked to illegitimate transfers. It activated biometric reconfirmation mode and purged any credential changes made without accompanying chain of custody validation. In under 4 minutes, the entire compliance network was put into security lockdown. Not visible to most users, but loud enough for the people who mattered. By 9:13 a.m., the CTO's assistant was standing outside my desk. He smiled nervously. "Evelyn, did something happen to the audit systems?" I looked up from my cup of tea. "Why do you ask?" "We're getting a lot of errors on the dashboard. Like, a lot. Certifications are showing as unverified." I nodded slowly. "I'm sure there's a good reason. Maybe someone changed something they weren't authorized to." He didn't respond. Because we both knew. I had. But only in response to what they started. At 10:27 a.m., Liam sent a company-wide message. "We are experiencing a temporary compliance system disruption. No need for concern." Translation: the ship is leaking, and the captain is using duct tape. By noon, 3 meetings were added to my calendar. All from people who hadn't spoken to me in weeks. I declined them all. Instead, I walked to the notary office downtown. I handed over an envelope. Inside was a signed statement, formal revocation of all license authority effective immediately. Clause 14B activated, within 72 hours, Every federal license tied to Covalin under my name would become legally void. No signature, no override, no backdoor. They had officially disconnected the last person who understood the engine, and the engine had just shut down. And I didn't do it out of vengeance. I did it out of principle. Because when people try to erase you from your own work, they deserve to learn what happens when the blueprint erases them in return. Lockout by Tuesday morning. The silence had changed. It wasn't the soft silence of polite tension anymore. It was the brittle, cracking kind. The silence before glass breaks. I arrived at the office at my usual time, though I knew I wouldn't be staying long. My access had already been revoked, at least on the surface. I wasn't here to work. I was here to witness. The lobby was unusually empty. Phones rang a beat longer than normal. The front desk assistant was whispering urgently into her headset, her eyes darting toward the elevators. Something was moving beneath the floorboards, and no one could stop it. I took the stairs. On the 4th floor, the operations wing was quiet in all the wrong ways. No chatter, no keyboard clicks, no meetings in progress. Just people looking at screens with the same expression. Something is very wrong. I walked past the glass conference room. Inside, Liam was pacing. 3 executives sat frozen around the table. One was holding a printed report like it was radioactive. The headline read, "License validation failure, immediate risk of noncompliance. I didn't need to go inside to know what was happening." Trigger C had worked exactly as intended. Every certification that had been transferred illegally was now marked invalid. The licensing dashboard was locked behind a credential gate only I had ever opened. Federal data syncs were failing. Internal audits couldn't proceed, and worst of all, for them, vendors were already noticing. At 9:11 a.m., procurement tried to authorize a medical component shipment. The vendor declined. License reference invalid. Certifying officer unrecognized. That single rejection triggered a cascade. 4 minutes later, the logistics manager emailed legal. 12 minutes after that, an external audit flag was raised. By Tundo 3, one of our biggest biotech clients issued a formal inquiry. And that's when Liam made his final move. He tried to break back in. He used my old credentials, tried a manual override, then requested a password reset. The system flagged the attempt, blacklisted the IP, and triggered a security escalation report to federal oversight logs. He hadn't just fumbled, he had committed digital fraud. I watched it unfold from a secure terminal downtown, logged in through a hardline VPN I'd kept hidden since the merger 3 years ago. I didn't enjoy it. Not in the way people think. It wasn't revenge. It was math. Inputs and outputs. Actions and consequences. You cannot fire the architect and expect the building to expand. You cannot cut out the foundation and expect the walls to hold. And yet, they tried. They assumed I was replaceable because I didn't brag. Because I wasn't loud. Because I never fought for the spotlight. What they didn't understand was that quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet means precise. And when someone precise decides to move, they don't push. They pull the thread and let the whole thing unravel. At 11:22 a.m., I received a message from an unknown number. Subject line, "Please call." I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my laptop, took a long breath, and finally, let go of the weight I'd been carrying. Let them feel what it means to build something on someone's back, and then try to bury the very bones that hold it up. They wanted forward momentum. Now they had it, straight into the wall. The audit had happened at exactly 8:56 a.m. on Wednesday. A calendar alert, one the entire company received at once. FDA inspection, unscheduled site visit 10:00 a.m., no warning. No time to prepare. The federal auditors had arrived. It was random, yes, but not unexpected. For me, it was math. For them, it was chaos. I'd spent years mapping the cycle of regulatory visits, tracking trends, vendor timelines, government fiscal years, even public holidays that impacted inspection probability. I didn't just run the compliance department. I read the patterns like a second language. The audit was never a question of if, only when, and this time when came too late. At 9:15 a.m., I received a text from a number I recognized but hadn't seen in months. Angela, internal counsel, just 3 words. Where are you? I didn't answer, because by the time she hit send, the inspectors were already in the lobby, asking for one thing: the active certifying officer. The receptionist paused. Checked the system. No name, no match, just a blinking gray space where mine had always been. The inspectors didn't wait long. They never do. Compliance isn't about kindness. It's about records, access, proof. If a company cannot produce a valid certifying officer during an inspection, the outcome is not a report. It's a shutdown. Upstairs, Liam was already sweating through his shirt. I imagined him clicking through the dashboard, watching every tab return the same result: access denied. He called legal. They tried to reach HR. HR tried to find the clause that started it all. Clause 14B, the one they had signed, the one I had executed with precision. By 9:37 a.m., Angela was in a boardroom with 2 inspectors. They asked her the most basic of questions. Who is the current license authority? She hesitated, then said the words that sealed the fate of everyone in that building. We're in transition. The lead inspector didn't flinch. Then you're in violation. By 10:12 m, 2 vendor contracts were paused, not by the company, but by the vendors themselves. Once flagged as non-compliant, any shipment or collaboration becomes a legal liability. No client, no matter how loyal, will risk federal penalties for the sake of loyalty. Liam made one last move. He tried to call me. Twice I watched his name flash on my phone screen. Decline. Then decline again. Because this wasn't personal anymore. This was professional. This was about a company that had hollowed out its most important layer and was now discovering that its walls were never designed to stand without it. That afternoon, I sat in a quiet cafe by the river. The wind was soft. My tea was still hot. I opened my tablet and read through the live updates in the compliance network. Someone had tried to access the backup logs. The system responded exactly as I'd written it to. Intrusion reported. Audit flagged. IP locked. And still, no one had figured it out. They thought compliance was paperwork. They never understood it was architecture. Now they were trapped in a building with no exits. CEO arrival Thursday morning arrived with the weight of expectation and the smell of panic. The elevators on the executive floor chimed at 8:31 a.m. sharp. Out stepped the man no one had seen in over 3 months. Victor Langston, Chief Executive Officer. The kind of CEO who operated more like a myth than a manager. Tanned from private islands. Sleeves always rolled just enough to signal confidence. Voice calm even when the building was metaphorically on fire. And this time, it wasn't metaphorical. Victor walked into the glass atrium like he expected applause. What he got instead was a room full of pale, wide-eyed directors trying not to look at the phones buzzing in their hands. He noticed. Victor didn't ask what was happening. He simply said, "Tell me everything." They did, or tried to. Compliance system down, licenses invalid, external audits failed, client contracts frozen, revenue bleeding. And worst of all, no one could say exactly when it started or how to stop it. Victor turned to Liam. "What the hell did you do?" Liam stammered something about realignment and streamlining, about modernization and role redundancy. Victor narrowed his eyes. "And you fired Evelyn?" Liam hesitated. "We didn't fire her, exactly. We restructured." Victor blinked slowly, then walked across the room, tapped on the screen, and pulled up my termination paperwork. There it was. Executed. Clause 40B activated. He stared at the screen for a long time. "You fired the license holder," he said, more to himself than anyone. Silence followed. Not awkward silence, the kind that lands like a stone in deep water and keeps sinking. Then he spoke again, lower this time. "You fired the one person who held every operational key we needed to survive an audit." Liam opened his mouth, then closed it. Someone from legal quietly placed a printed report in front of Victor. 5 major vendors, all suspended due to invalid licensing. He flipped to the next page. My name was listed on every single one. Victor stood motionless, then turned to HR. "Has anyone contacted her?" They nodded. "We've tried." No response. Victor didn't sit, he paced. Then stopped. Get her back. Liam coughed. She might not want to come back. Victor looked at him like he'd just barked at royalty. Then we convince her. But, no buts. Draft a consulting offer. 6 months minimum. Double her last compensation. Bonuses tied to system recovery. And a gag order. Legal took notes furiously. HR started scrambling through files. Victor stared at the wall where the licensing dashboard used to be projected, back when it still worked. The display was off now. Blank. Symbolic. He didn't say it out loud. But I know what he was thinking. They hadn't just fired an employee. They'd severed the nerve system of the company. And I wasn't waiting at the gates anymore. I was already building somewhere else. The offer, the email arrived at 2:06 p.m., subject line executive consulting opportunity, confidential sender. Board operations, Covalent Biosystems. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I watched the steam rise from my cup of jasmine tea. The same cafe. The same corner table by the window. Sunlight played on the glass, casting quiet patterns across the table. My world, for the first time in years, felt quiet on purpose. Not because I had been muted, but because I had chosen silence. When I did open the message, I knew what to expect. They had no other move left. It was professionally worded, full of sincerity polished by lawyers. We recognize the critical nature of your prior contributions. Your expertise remains uniquely valuable to restoring operational compliance. We are prepared to offer maximum flexibility to support your return. Then came the terms. 6-month consulting contract. Discretionary bonuses tied to system recovery milestones. Access reinstated immediately upon acceptance. A clause prohibiting all public or private commentary. No mention of the clause they had triggered. No apology. No ownership of what happened. Just veiled desperation dressed as professionalism. I read it twice, then closed the tab. They were asking for my help rebuilding the same structure they had tried to erase me from. The same foundation they'd torn down in the name of progress. The same progress that had now stranded them in legal purgatory. At 5:41 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Local area code. I let it ring. The voicemail came through 10 minutes later. It was Victor. His voice was steady, formal, polished. Evelyn, I want to personally apologize for how your departure was handled. Mistakes were made. We should never have let things get to this point. Your legacy here is undeniable. If you're willing, I'd like to speak directly. I played it once, then deleted it. At 7:12 p.m., I replied to the offer. Subject Executive Consulting Opportunity Confidential Message Victor, thank you for the proposal. I appreciate the effort. Unfortunately, I do not return to buildings that tried to collapse on top of me. Please find attached my signed Clause 14B revocation form, confirmation of license termination from the National Compliance Registry, screenshot of your internal dashboard, 72 hours post-termination showing my name grayed out and irreplaceable. I wish you clarity, structure, and a smoother next audit. Evelyn Wren. No anger. No theatrics. Just receipts. I clicked send, then leaned back in my chair and let the city fall into night outside the cafe windows. Across town, boardrooms were filling with whispers. Phones ringing, emails bouncing. And at the center of it all was a system built on my work, now inaccessible, unsalvageable, and legally frozen. Because the truth is, power doesn't shout, it just quietly walks away, taking the foundation with it. Fallout Friday morning brought no relief, no fresh start. Just a string of quiet disasters wrapped in email chains and unanswered calls. At 7:04 a.m., Covalent's procurement department tried to finalize a shipment of sterilization agents for a government hospital contract. The vendor's system rejected the order. The license ID provided no longer matched any active certifying officer in the registry. Status non-compliant. At 7:37 a.m., the legal team received a request from the Department of Health asking for updated credential confirmation before releasing a previously approved budget extension. They couldn't provide one. By 8:02 a.m., internal chat threads were flooded. Subject lines like, urgent, is the EU audit still scheduled? Client requesting proof of active licenses. Any update? Liam, we need a call ASAP. But Liam wasn't answering messages anymore. He was in the executive suite, pacing a circle into the carpet, while Victor flipped through a printout from legal. Each page more damning than the last. 5 major clients had entered pause clauses in their contracts. Without an active compliance signature, they had every right to suspend deliverables, payments, and communications. Revenue projections collapsed by double digits in 24 hours. By 9:00 a.m., Covalin's vendor dashboard looked like a crash site. Red flags, license errors, contracts pending. Public data feeds were already showing disruptions in their delivery chains. Anyone watching would know something was wrong. And still, no one from leadership would say the word out loud. We broke our own system. Worse, we fired the one person who understood how it worked. Liam sat at the edge of the conference table, face pale, voice low. Can't we just recertify someone else? Victor didn't respond. But legal did. The reinstatement period takes at least 3 weeks. That's under emergency review. Full clearance across all verticals could take 2 months. Victor's jaw clenched. 2 months in biotech compliance isn't just a delay, it's a death sentence. One by one, the pillars began to fall. Omegavax, their flagship client, issued a formal breach notice. Stratusmid canceled their data license renewal. 2 partner labs paused trial collaboration pending regulatory review. And internally, employees began asking questions. Why was Evelyn gone? Why hadn't the system warned us? Why were we being told to stay calm, while every metric pointed to collapse? No one answered, because every answer required one thing: admitting they had dismantled the structure without understanding what held it up. I watched it happen in silence. I wasn't celebrating. I was watching the natural consequence of arrogance meet reality. And the truth is, I didn't do this to them. They did it to themselves. All I had done was let go. They were the ones who thought the house would stand without the keystone. Now they were trying to rebuild the foundation while standing in the rubble. Rebuilding elsewhere 3 weeks later, the dust was still settling at Covalin. But I wasn't there to see it. I had moved on, not out of spite, but out of precision. I don't stay in rooms where I've been asked to leave, especially when the roof is caving in. Instead, I was standing in a different lobby now. Clean floors, sharp lines, quiet confidence, Stratacore Systems, a rising firm in the biotech compliance space. Smaller, hungrier, smarter. They didn't find me through a recruiter. They didn't lure me with promises or titles. They found me the same way people find blueprints in ruins. Because the last structure that stood had my signature on every support beam. Their message was simple. We don't want your RA Summe, we want your mind. My first day was quiet, no welcome banners. No awkward orientation videos, just a corner office, a clean desk, and a terminal waiting for my credentials. I logged in, and for the first time in months, the system responded like it recognized me. No errors, no roadblocks, just access. The irony wasn't lost on me. At Covalin, I had been silenced, sidelined, and erased. Here, they let me speak without asking for a permission slip. Within the first week, I redesigned their compliance flow from the ground up. No shortcuts, no patches. Just infrastructure designed to hold under pressure. The kind that wouldn't fall apart just because someone with a title didn't understand it. And then came the news. Omegavax and Stratusmid, 2 of Covalin's biggest clients, had terminated their contracts permanently. Their statements were short, professional. Confidence in operational compliance could not be restored in the given time frame. That confidence, it wasn't in Covalin's name, it had been in mine, and now, it followed me. At Stratacore, we signed both deals within days. No discounts, no bidding wars, just certainty. Because in a field where one error can cost lives and millions, reputation is currency, and mine had just been withdrawn from one bank and deposited into another. Back at Covalin, things weren't as quiet. The dashboard still hadn't fully recovered. The fines were stacking, internal audits were failing, and Liam, last I heard, he was reassigned to a non-operational role. Special Projects Advisor, which in corporate speak means sit in the corner and stop touching things. They didn't throw a farewell party. He left like he arrived, overconfident and underinformed. Victor never reached out again. He didn't need to. He knew. We both did. When you fire the one holding the keys, you don't just lose access. You lose direction. And some doors, once closed, don't open again. What they never understood, there's a strange peace that comes when you're no longer trying to prove your worth. For years, I had quietly carried systems on my back. Licenses, protocols, audit chains, while people above me presented slides about innovation I had already written into the code. I never needed the credit, but I expected the respect. They never understood the difference. They thought power looked like loud voices in conference rooms and buzzwords in capital letters. But real power is silent. It moves slowly. And when it leaves behind nothing you can copy. At Stratacore, I didn't need to fight for a seat at the table. They simply asked what I needed to build, and then they listened. That was all. Not applause, not flattery, just space. And that space, it's where clarity grows. The first system I built for Stratacore took 10 days. It replaced 14 outdated processes with a single dashboard. Every alert was tied to real-time data. Every license had a living record. Every credential required multi-factor biometric verification and a chain of authority with zero ambiguity, nothing hidden, no gray areas. It was beautiful in its simplicity and ruthless in its security. I named it Spine, because that's what they forgot compliance was. Not paperwork, not a checklist, but a spine, the structure that holds up everything else, the thing that, when broken, makes walking impossible. One of the new analysts, Amir, bright kid, sharp thinker, asked me over coffee, "Why didn't you go back to fix Covalin?" "You could have named your price." I smiled, not because it was a naive question, but because it was the question they all had in their heads. "Because they didn't fire me by accident," I said. "They fired me on purpose. And once someone shows you how little they understand your value, your only job is to leave them with the silence of that mistake." He nodded, slowly, like he felt it in his bones. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even want redemption. I wanted evolution. And sometimes to evolve, you have to burn the old maps, especially the ones that no longer mark your name. Back at Covalin, I heard they brought in consultants. Big firm. Expensive. They ran diagnostics for 3 weeks and still couldn't restore the original dashboard logic. The code was functional but unreadable, optimized by me over a decade into something no outsider could untangle. Because you can't reverse engineer understanding. You can only start again. And they were doing just that, from the basement up. Which is fitting, really. That's where I started. But they don't have me this time. All they have now is the memory of what it felt like when the system worked. And the quiet realization that the reason it worked was gone. The note on the monitor, "There's a story in every object we leave behind." Mine was 5 words on a yellow sticky note. I didn't plan it. I didn't write it in anger or spite. I wrote it one afternoon at Stratacore after finalizing the last piece of the new compliance framework. Everyone had gone home early. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet I had once feared. But now it felt earned. I stared at the screen for a long time, watching the alert feed scroll by in perfect order. Green lights, secure chains, verified licenses. Every system in sync. Every metric under control. It was beautiful, not because it was complex, but because it didn't need me anymore. That's when I realized something strange. True success isn't building something they depend on. It's building something they'll never need to fear again. So I picked up a pen, leaned forward, and wrote it down. Block letters, no punctuation, no signature. In case they ever forget I was the license, I stuck it on the corner of my monitor. That was it. I didn't need a title. I didn't need credit. I didn't need my name printed on walls or plaques or emails. Because the people who mattered, the ones who understood what a system is worth when it's quiet and reliable, they already knew. And the ones who didn't, well, they learned. Eventually, through audits, through shutdowns, through frantic emails they never thought they'd send, they learned that replacing people isn't the same as replacing knowledge. That erasing a name doesn't erase the architecture beneath it. That sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with the loudest ideas. It's the one who leaves without locking the door, because they know the building will collapse without them anyway. I leaned back in my chair, took a slow sip of coffee, and let the weight of it all settle. Not like a burden, but like a legacy. I didn't need to make noise. I just needed to make systems that spoke for themselves. And now they were speaking loudly. Every green light, every restored contract, every new deal signed under my name. That was the voice. That was the answer. That was the license. Epilogue: what comes after people still ask if I miss it. The routines, the hallway smiles, the chaos dressed as progress. What I miss, truthfully, isn't the job. It's the version of me who believed being essential was enough to be protected. The version who thought building quietly meant people would guard what I built. But here's what no one prepares you for sometimes. The system doesn't fail because it's flawed. It fails because the wrong people hold the blueprint and never once read the foundation. And in those moments, you're left with two options: stay and be buried under what collapses, or walk away before the rubble becomes your legacy. I walked, not in anger, in awareness, because knowing your worth doesn't require permission, and it doesn't always need applause. Now, when I look back, I don't remember the job titles. I remember the silence after they let me go, and how that silence grew louder than every meeting they held without me. They called it redundancy, but what they cast out wasn't extra. It was everything essential, disguised as ordinary. It was the invisible architecture, the weight beneath their comfort. They thought the system would run without me. And in doing so, they taught themselves what I never had to say. Some people don't need to burn bridges. They just take the screws with them when they leave. So here's the question I leave with you. Have you ever been underestimated, labeled just part of the process, when really you were the process? Ever stayed quiet too long, until the silence became your power? Have you ever been the license, and they didn't know until it was gone? If you felt that, let's talk. In the comments. Would you have stayed and fought? Or walked away with your dignity and your data intact? And if this story made you feel seen, share it with someone who's been overlooked. Subscribe to Telling Story with Me, so you don't miss the next quiet storm we unpack together. Because the world will keep underestimating the quiet ones until we choose to tell our side of the story. And sometimes, that's all it takes. A story told at the right moment. To remind someone that they were never just anything. They were always the foundation. They were always the key. They were always the license. And now, they're finally free to build something better. Somewhere that sees them. For real.